This is a survival broadcast, not a performance. I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to give you hope in the chaos. If you're listening to this, I'll assume you already know something's wrong. Maybe the economy's cracking, maybe the power grid's not as stable as they say. Maybe you just looked around and realized nobody's coming to save us. Either way, you're here because you want to do something about it. And here's the first truth I'm going to give you. You will fail. You will try to build something and it will break. You'll prep for one emergency and get hit by another. You'll rely on someone and then they'll ghost you the moment it gets real. But that's no reason to stop. That's the entire point of this episode. If you're going to survive, not just the week, not just this year, but long term, you have to design for failure, not avoid it. Not pretend it won't happen. Plan for it. Build systems that bend instead of snap. Build relationships that can take a hit. And build a mindset that expects the worst and doesn't crumble when it shows up. Most people never get this far. They freeze at the first sign of failure, but I've failed more times than I can count. I've lit shelters on fire. I've lost gear in floods. I've been stranded without water, and I'm still here. Still talking, still giving hope. So if you're ready to hear what it really means to survive out here, not the TV version, not the Instagram ready cabin in the woods, but the bleeding, shivering, rebuilding reality of off-grid life, then let's get into it. Before we go any further, I want to give a quick shout out to the folks making it possible for me to keep telling you the truth out here. If you're looking for land, real land, not overpriced nonsense on Zillow, go to openairproperties.net. They specialize in off-grid, owner-financed land in places like Arizona, Arkansas, and Colorado. No banks, no credit checks, just land you can actually build on. So visit Stephanie over at openairproperties.net. That's who I trust, and they've backed this whole 5-part series, so make sure to check Stephanie out at openairproperties.net. Here's what no one tells you when you go off-grid. Trying to get it perfect is the fastest way to fail. Most people show up out here with some drama in their head. They watched a dozen YouTubes with solar cabins and perfect lighting. They spent months drawing out diagrams, watching tool reviews, planning every wire and water line down to the inch. But when they actually set foot on the land, they freeze because the ground's not level. The sun doesn't hit the way they thought. The weather changes. Their gear breaks. Their budget blows up on the first week. And because they were chasing perfection, they gave no room to adapt. I've seen people abandon everything because they couldn't meet their own expectations. And I get it. I've been there. When I first started trying to build anything permanent, I kept holding myself to some fake standard in my head. Like I had to make it work flawlessly the first time or I wasn't cut out for it. But that's not survival. That's insecurity dressed up as planning. Real resilience doesn't come from perfection. It comes from improvisation. When you stop trying to be perfect, you actually start to learn. You start to pay attention to the wind instead of forcing your design. You learn to read your tools. You build with what you have, not with what you wish you had. You find out quick what actually matters and what doesn't. And that kind of wisdom, you can't buy it. You can't plan your way into it. You have to earn it, usually by failing hard and crawling back up anyways. So if you're watching this and you're waiting until you can get it right, stop. Go mess something up. Go try something. Build it, break it, patch it, learn from it. You'll be stronger for it. Out here, the ones who survive aren't the ones who get it perfect. They're the ones who bounce back the fastest when it all goes sideways. Let me tell you what taught me more than any YouTube tutorial, book, or expert ever did. Failing on the trail. Okay, one of my earliest wake-up calls came on the Florida Trail. I didn't even have a tent. I was sleeping rough under trees, a tarp when I could find one. Eventually, someone gave me a cheap Ozark Trail tent. You know, the kind that leaks if you look at it wrong. That thing nearly drowned me in the first storm. But I didn't throw it out, I made it work. I learned how to set it up on higher ground. I studied airflow. I paid attention to runoff. I built small trenches around the perimeter when the storms came. I figured out the direction of the wind. I even adjusted tension points based on how much fabric stretched when it was wet. That $30 piece of garbage taught me more about shelter integrity than any four-season tent ever could. It didn't come with a manual. It forced me to learn the hard way. And that's the point I want to drill into your head. Failure is your curriculum. If you're not failing, you're probably not pushing hard enough to survive out here. There's this idea, especially among new off-gridders, that mistakes mean you did something wrong. But that's not true. Mistakes are how you level up. It's how you burn bad habits out of your system. You thought solar was going to be easy? Wait till you fry a charge controller and lose power in a dust storm. You thought rain catchment was a no-brainer? Wait until you realize your barrels attract mosquitoes and start growing algae because you didn't filter or shade your supply. Failure doesn't test your systems, it reveals your blind spots. When things go wrong, and they still will, the average person freezes. They panic. They blame the gear. Or worse, they give up completely. But if you've designed your life around the idea that failure is inevitable and valuable, then you don't crumble, you adapt. Let me be blunt. The people who fail hardest out here are the ones who expect things to work the first time. The ones who succeed, they're the ones who walk into the wilderness expecting to get punched in the mouth and keep going anyways. So the next time something breaks, don't cuss it out and give up. Study it, take notes, rebuild it better. That's what survival looks like. Let me tell you the truth about off-grid living that you won't hear from most of these glossy van life or homestead hack videos. One system is no system. If you've only got one way to cook, one source of power, one tool for the job, you don't have a setup, you have a gamble. And the odds, they're never in your favor. You want to survive long term? You build with the assumption that something will fail. Not might, but will. That's why I overbuild. That's why I stash extra. That's why I never throw out a rusty pot, a cracked shovel, or an old tarp. Because I've lived through what happens when the one thing you depend on snaps in half and there's nobody coming to help. I've learned this with fire. I once built a stove out of cinder blocks. Looked solid, held together, but I had no idea how the wind would hit. First gust came in through and knocked the flame out every time I tried to cook. Luckily, I had extra blocks. I rebuilt the sidewalls higher. I closed off 2 corners. I learned how to draft the heat where I needed it, and suddenly I had a windproof stove with built-in airflow. If I hadn't overbuilt, I would have never eaten that night. This mindset shows up everywhere. In your power systems, your water storage, your tools, your lighting. You need backup plans for your backup plans. And I don't care how much space it takes or how minimalist you think you are. Out here, redundancy is the difference between a rough day and a not so good day. You don't build systems that are perfect. You build systems that fail smart. A good setup doesn't mean nothing ever breaks. It means something does break. You have 10 minutes of cursing and then a plan. Let me say something that might piss off a few gearheads. Expensive doesn't mean durable. Expensive doesn't mean reliable. Expensive means you're paying to skip the learning curve, and you can't. I've used high-end equipment. I've also used dollar store tarps and Walmart tents. And I'll tell you right now, I've seen more failures from fancy gear that couldn't handle real-world conditions than I have from scrappy setups built with understanding. The gear wasn't the problem. My experience was the problem. And only failure could fix that. You want the truth? If you're new to off-grid life, don't start with premium gear. Start with what you can afford to break. You'll learn faster, you'll waste less, and when something does go sideways, you won't be frozen in fear because your $300 tent just ripped open in a storm. You'll patch it, reinforce it, and keep moving. Let me give it to you straight. Your shelter is going to fail, and that's not a threat, it's the design. When I first got into this land, I wasn't out here in some romantic wilderness fantasy. I was in the back of a truck, not because I wanted it rough, but because that's what I had. That truck bed was my launch point, and before I built anything, I did something that most people skip. I paid attention. I didn't start hammering boards together on day one. I watched, I waited, I saw where the wind came from, how the sun moved across the land, how the temperature dropped at night, and when the storms rolled in. That observation phase is the only reason I didn't make even dumber mistakes than I already have. But make no mistake, I did mess up. I built walls that the wind laughed at. I used materials that cracked under pressure. I assumed things would hold when they didn't. And every single time, I learned something new. That's the point of shelter out here. It's not supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to teach you something. If you stuck with me through this whole series, I want you to hear this loud and clear. You're not broken because things didn't work. You're not a failure because your first setup collapsed or your budget blew up. You're not behind because you didn't get it right the first time. That's what this entire series was about. Not selling you fantasy, but preparing you for truth. Because out here, the only people who make it long term are the ones who know how to take a hit and get back up. The ones who rebuild after the storm. The ones who over-prepare, adapt on the fly, and stay humble enough to admit, I was wrong, let's fix it. That's what it means to design for failure. That's what it means to build something that bends and not break. And if you're still here, still listening, still learning, I'd say you're one of the few who gets it.